So this is very exciting, and I'm really grateful to the conference organisers for inviting me to speak today. It's relatively rare that as a communications professional I get to come out from behind the scenes and offer a perspective on something. And I'm mindful that I've got 10 minutes to gallop through my presentation today, and what I'm going to do is offer a perspective or a philosophy of our approach to communications. I think it's going to touch on a lot of what's been covered in this session so far, hopefully wrap some things up in a bow, and I'm going to try and quickly touch on some case studies. But there's so many examples I could give for what I want to say. I could do a full Royal Institution Christmas lecture on this, so I'm going to try and whip through in 10 minutes and start with first principles in comms. I don't want the language I use to be a barrier. I'm sure all of you in this room are comfortable with the term co-management, but what do I mean when I'm talking about co-management? It's about building, maintaining, and evolving structures for managing coastal resources and fisheries. In my instance, my expertise is mostly around kind of fisheries co-management. It's about bringing together different groups and creating structures that value different knowledge types equally through mutual trust and respect. We've heard a lot about trust today, and I want to talk about that a bit more. It creates shared responsibility and accountability for the decisions that are made, and it's often about balancing different pillars of sustainability. So there will be those with a focus on environmental sustainability, but it's also weaving through perspectives around social and economic sustainability too, ultimately developing long-term resilient and adaptive management structures. And I've put a little footnote here where when I talk about building co-management structures, at the really participatory end of this, I mean co-designing and co-creating, really getting people in from the ground up. So we've heard a little bit about bottom-up approaches today, and that's what I mean when I refer to co-management. It's all about collaboration, and my presentation today will focus on how good communications or being communications-minded can support collaborative projects in its broader sense. And it's about empowering, so offering equal power, equal respect to different knowledge types and perspectives within these structures. Obviously, the theme of this conference is inclusivity, and in thinking about how we communicate both internally and externally on co-management projects, we need to think about being inclusive, whether that's taking on board different cultural and generational perspectives, whether it's just deeply understanding the different roles and perspectives and priorities of the stakeholders involved, and obviously, crucially, I've touched on shared responsibility. As we've heard today, it's rarely, if ever, easy or straightforward. These kinds of structures that hold such varying priorities, personalities, perspectives together and try and adapt and evolve over time require work. They require a mindfulness of how we talk about them, act within them, and communicate. But what on earth do I know about that? So as Natasha referenced, I have been running a comms agency for 10 years now, despite vowing never to work in comms. So hopefully I know a little bit about communicating. But why would I know anything about co-management of fisheries? So the answer is that we were actually founded to support a project that was all about co-managing fisheries all over Europe. Fisheries of different sizes and scales, so some of them were just single-handed ice fishers in Estonia, some of them were Mediterranean coastal fisheries with difficulties with local stocks collapsing, some of them were large industrial mixed fisheries. We were the comms partner for the GAPS 2 project, which was unusual in that it equally weighted the role of communications, participation, and kind of impact alongside the research conducted by scientists and the program management of the initiative. So through that project across 4 years, we engaged with 267 fishers, 67 scientists, 41 policymakers, and funded 19 PhDs or MScs. We covered 11 different countries with all the cultural sensitivities that required, and we conducted over 6,000 research and outreach activities, including all these joint field trips, meetings, conferences, and workshops that you can see listed on the screen. So it was a hugely varied and engaged integrated communications function across all of those activities. What I want to touch on today is the key lessons in brief that we learned and how we apply them and how we operate today, how we use comms to support collaborative initiatives that are about protecting the environment and taking communities with us, giving them their say in that. Firstly, we approach projects wanting to gain a deep understanding of stakeholders' needs and their motivations to engage with that project. That can support participatory stakeholder mapping, it can support semi-structured interview processes, it can help us consider audiences in a more kind of traditional comms way, but really this is about understanding who is involved and why, and how can we best work with them to meet their needs. We've heard a lot about trust today, and I would agree that trust is hard to build and easy to lose. And so one of the ways in which we engage with projects with this communications lens is how can we build that trust? How can we set a tone of transparency, whether it's about the amount of funding available, the amount of hours we've got to offer, whether it's about red lines within a project. I think setting that tone of openness is essential to a truly collaborative project's DNA. As comms professionals, we write strategies a lot, but actually, where we can, whenever we can, we want to co-design those strategies. So we might be able to provide a framework, but then it's about bringing all the partners together to think about, if we're communicating about the work we're doing together, what works best for you? What are the tools that work best for you? What are the moments that are going to be most strategically valuable to what we're trying to achieve here for your local environment or your local businesses? And then that strategy also needs to adapt and evolve. Co-management structures, successful co-management projects can't be static, and so the strategies that support them can't either. They need revisiting, they need consideration of key moments within the landscape that might really benefit that project. As communicators, we love knowing when to tell a story and telling stories, but actually rarely am I the best person to be telling a story about a project. These types of initiative, collaborative, environmental, co-management environmental projects are all about the communities that have a stake in that local resource. And finding the right messenger can really impact how a message goes across. So a community voice is often the best kind of voice to champion these initiatives. And a lesser known function of thinking about projects with a comms mindset is also knowing when not to communicate. Sometimes when you are building a deep foundation or the bonds of trust and transparency within an initiative, being quiet, going behind the scenes for a while, working and choosing when to strategically communicate and when not to speak is so important. I've put here that we often act as a critical friend. I actually think the right word for that is perhaps a naive friend. So I've worked in science communication now for 12 years, but I don't have science qualifications beyond GCSE. And really that's how Mindfully Wired got started, was I had so many questions to ask all the conferences I was going to. Offering that outsider perspective for collaborative initiatives that work on something as important as environmental protection, resource conservation is so important, so never being afraid to ask naive questions. We like to function as a resource. I think any comms support to a project of this nature should be at the end of a phone for a conversation that, again, is part of building those bonds of trust. But equally, at the kind of more traditional, typical end of the comm spectrum, we can help develop pitches and help find resources to extend project lifespan and ensure that these are long-term, well-funded initiatives. And this might be part of the knowing when not to communicate facet to taking this communications lens to co-management projects, but helping to create those neutral spaces. Whilst I have the luxury today of standing here and offering a perspective on something, it is never our role to offer a perspective on the kind of environmental projects that we help to work on. It's creating a space where these different knowledge types and priorities can come together, work together, sometimes hash out differences, but really communication isn't always about offering a point of view. And of course, there are the fun bits, so celebrating great work, shouting about successes, shining a spotlight on initiatives so others can learn from them and build those practices into their own work. It's also about networking, sharing ideas, and sharing experience. So this is about a different vision of communications and what communications is. It's not just this fantastic list of tools. These are some of the tricks of the trade. It's rather a more kind of integrated and mindful thinking about communications across the lifespan of any participatory or collaborative initiative. It doesn't mean that everyone needs a comms consultancy associated with their project. A comms consultancy is a luxury. It's about thinking about yourselves as communicators within the course of these kinds of projects. And crucially, it shouldn't be a last-minute bolt-on. Don't do the good work and then celebrate it. Think about this throughout the lifespan. I'm just going to really quickly touch on some contemporary examples that we are delighted to be supporting with this kind of approach at the moment. One is the Future of Our Inshore Fisheries initiative, which is really laying the groundwork and has directly fed into the development of the front-runner fisheries management plans. I'm just going to whip through this really quickly, noting time. But what's been really exciting about this project is working on an industry-led initiative that is feeding so directly into policy outcomes for the future of fishing in the UK. And also the fact that this initiative is going to do a knowledge exchange trip this year back to one of our original GAP2 case studies on the Catalan coast, where co-management is legally mandated for all inshore fisheries, to learn how that has impacted how their fisheries are functioning and how their co-management structures work there, and bring that information back to the UK. Also, across my 10 years working in fisheries, there's nothing harder to communicate about with and for than the issue of sensitive species bycatch. And we're supporting 2 national and international initiatives, bringing fishermen together with others. Everyone hates this problem, but it's so emotive and so difficult to think about how to build co-management structures and communications approaches around it. So again, we're drawing on some GAP2 experience for these projects. And so to conclude, communicating can and should be much more than surface-level PR. We're not just here for glossy website and press releases. And again, you don't have to be a communications professional to be mindful of these approaches in your work. It can play a really integral role in forming collaborative structures and helping them to evolve and last. And it is essential to inclusivity, which doesn't just happen by accident. It's strategic. It is thoughtful. It needs to be woven through every facet of a project. These are transferable skills. We all have a part to play in being mindful of our role in fostering participation and inclusivity, and it will be essential to us making the change that everyone here has spoken about wanting to see. And really amazing and enduring things can happen when you work with this kind of mutually respectful and collaborative approach. So, as I said, GAP2 is well more than 12 years old now, but we're still drawing from that example for contemporary work. So thank you so much. It's been great to speak to you today.